Our goal here is to provide some examples, explicit examples, mostly from forests, about how these different population growth models work, how you can use them, and how you can recognize when these respective processes are happening in natural ecosystems. So our learning objectives here are to answer a series of questions. What drives population dynamics of individual species? If you understand that, you can anticipate some things about how they may grow. Why do species go extinct? That has practical value. It's a very fundamental process that affects biodiversity on Earth. It's a natural process, but also has some characteristics about it that are undesirable. So let's try to understand it. And then also, very practical, what controls population sizes or the rates of increase and their maximum sizes. When you understand these, in particular when you can manipulate them, you can anticipate many problems that occur in forest ecology, in natural resource ecology, and you may also be able to intervene. Okay, so our reading for this week is about the Kaibab Plateau. We're going to my closer to my old stomping grounds. If you don't know the Kaibab Plateau, this is a highland that's to the north of the Grand Canyon. This photograph has, you can see this aerial photograph has the Grand Canyon here. It's a highland. It is a large forested plateau. It's relatively high. You know, ranging at least up to, I believe, about 7,000 feet, maybe as high as 8,000 feet in some of the high points on it. It's an interesting area. It's isolated, mostly surrounded by either the Grand Canyon, this big, really big barrier, or deserts. And it's not impossible, but it's hard for animals to get to it. So immigration rates are relatively low. And this week's reading this paper by Dan Binkley is really great for us because it combines many different aspects of population ecology. In fact, it covers all four of the population dynamics that we want to talk about here. What happened? Well, there was this really great deer population. It was pretty famous. Teddy Roosevelt was hunted there, was really into it. The Kaibab deer population, and there were famous big deer, and there was the thought that removing predators from this plateau would help maintain the deer populations. It didn't work out like that. Removing the deer population actually caused the deer population to removing the predator population. Talking about, I believe it was wolves, definitely mountain lions. Some kind of crazy things happened, even removing bald eagles or maybe golden eagles. I can't remember. So, something you wouldn't expect to ever attack deer. Anyway, we've learned from our mistakes mostly since then. But at any rate, predator removal caused a massive increase in the Kaibab deer population. Now, these deer rely on forage, grasses, and especially aspen in order to maintain their populations or to survive in this environment. And there was this big population crash that occurred within 20 years or so of the predator removal, and the populations of these deer almost went extinct. And why was that? It was in part because all the forage was gone. Now, since then, the deer populations have been mostly maintained. This is managed by Arizona Game and Fish, and but that hasn't been the end of changes in the stand dynamics within this area, this landscape. And we're going to talk about those because they're relevant to us trying to understand these population models. Here's a little bit more information about this and some photos that are really helpful in the paper. This is an unplanned herbivory exclusion. This is a corral. It was abandoned, and what you see here is that within this corral, which deer would have been restricted from accessing, there's much more significant regeneration of aspen. And when you go up onto the plateau now, it's rare to find trees that would have regenerated or established 100 years ago, because it would only have occurred in particular areas where the deer were not able to browse, because basically they browsed everything that was available on this entire plateau, and a lot of the population collapse was because they ran out of forage, they ran out of food. So it's interesting, this paper, I can't say enough about this paper. What you see here, when you look at patterns of regeneration, it's extremely low in the periods where deer populations were high, 1920s and 1950s. You can, using dendrochronological techniques, that is looking at the tree rings and patterns of growth, how old trees are, you can establish more or less they're well, definitely within a decade or within 5 years, you can figure out when a tree germinated and established. And you can see these kind of these holes, if you will, in the regeneration of aspen on the plateau. That is a consequence of removing the predators. And here's also some measurements showing aspen regeneration within and outside of exclosures. So, not surpringly, if you kept the deer browse away, you get aspen regeneration. It regenerates well within this environment. But if there's uninhibited herbivory on aspen, it doesn't get very big. Eventually the trees die. And then something kind of interesting is quite later, more recently, there has been a great increase in aspen regeneration within these forests, and that is following changes in competition. Competitive dynamics. When you remove the main competitors of these species, setting aside the effects of deer, because deer populations are managed to be relatively constant here now through hunting and maintenance of predator populations. If you remove competition, say with extensive logging of pines, the primary species which compete with aspen in these environments, what you get is a lot more aspen regeneration. So look at the patterns of aspen regeneration on the Kaibab Plateau, excuse me. What you're going to see is severe restrictions in regeneration because of overgrazing, a consequence of predator removal. You can see evidence of exponential growth. You can see evidence of growth that is constrained by carrying capacity. And lastly, you can see the effects of removing competition. It's a great example, covers everything that we are out here, that we're trying to do within this section of the course. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So let's deal with the first population here among these, and that is exponential growth. Right here, we're gonna look at this model, and we're gonna try to recognize the realism in what is a very unrealistic model. And it will allow us, open up the possibility for us to understand how population growth is actually constrained in reality. So many different kinds of animal and plant populations can grow exponentially. Here's a tree pest. These are gall-causing aphids on cottonwood. This is actually over in Pine Creek. Aphids are lots of insects, can grow exponentially. They won't grow, their populations grow exponentially. They won't grow indefinitely exponentially because they'll run out of resources eventually, but they will for a period of time have these really dramatic increases in growth. And this is just what the exponential growth model looks like. This is the mathematical form of it, and what it suggests is just this nonlinear growth. It increases very rapidly, and the problem with the model is that it's not unconstrained. It grows up into infinity, which is not real, which is not realistic. Real systems do not grow unconstrained. But there's truth within this, if you will, truth, and that's that many populations actually can grow, have exponential increase, and they include things like aphids, but they actually also include, for a brief period of time, many trees. These are individual kauri trees. This is regeneration of kauri, a major forest species in the north of New Zealand, and you can have very extensive regeneration at this stage. Of course, it doesn't grow to it doesn't grow exponentially for very long, but we'll get to that. We'll get to what makes this more realistic. What have you got here? You've got the growth rate. This equation is just the growth rate times the population size. And we can add more realism to this by constraining growth by birth and death, but we do have limitations. So there's the other lecture materials that go into that a little bit more, but here's just another example to convince you that this happens sometimes. The great Taft mouse outbreak of 1926, and Taft is just 50 or 60 miles away from San Luis Obispo. A massive exponential growth of mice, again, another species that is, that can have exponential growth. Basically, the town was overrun by mice. Kind of crazy story, kind of cool. This is a photograph from a museum which is in Taft, which I really want to go to because it has the history of this mouse outbreak. Mouse outbreaks are not restricted to Taft or California. There are other examples, especially in places like Australia. This is kind of more likely to happen because these are non-native. There's a lot of initially unconstrained growth. And like I say, there's a limit to how realistic this growth, this model can be. When it is growing exponentially, when populations are growing exponentially, it does a good job. The model does a good job of depicting them. But eventually, it becomes unrealistic because real populations don't grow exponentially forever, even when they have some part of their lifetime some period, even when for some period of time they are growing exponentially. So here's the story of St. Matthews Island. This is an isolated island off the coast of Alaska. Reindeer, this is this great graphic novel that tells the story of this. Reindeer were introduced to the island as a supplemental food supply for the few people who were there. I believe it was a scientific research station. Deer lived very well on a slow-growing lichen. Population increased exponentially until they ran out of lichen. They consumed all the lichen. It basically consumed it faster than they could, then it would be replaced, and the population collapsed, eventually going extinct. So, like I say, exponential growth cannot go on forever. There has to be some constraints. So, how do those emerge? That's what we talk about now.